Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be going over Crown the Third, which is a super major that is happening this weekend, and this tournament is insanely stacked. It feels like after Battle of BC, maybe we'd get a little bit of calm, but no, we are right back into the swing of things. For the top 16 of this tournament, you get Cosmos, Gact, Jackal, and Ken in 13th. 9th you have Apollo Kage, Meister, Zomba, and Kurama. For 7th you have both Onin and T. 5th you have Shuton and Sonics. 4th you have Light. 3rd you have Leo, 2nd Tweak, and 1st is Spargo. And the first player I want to take a look at is going to be Kurama. Now, Kurama isn't seeded to get top 8, but I definitely think he could through multiple paths, actually. His first opponent that he has to go through is Dark Wizzy, which is a bit of a weird one because, Ditto's in Smash Ultimate, just in Smash in general, can be fairly scary. And if Dark Wizzy was playing like he was at Battle of BC, this is definitely an area that Kurama can get upset in. I am still going to favor Kurama on paper, though, because a majority of results have been better from him, and he just looks like a really refined player right now. Next matchup, it'd be him versus T, and I would also favor Kurama here. They've only played once. It was at LSI, and Kurama was able to take that. And just because you win the first encounter doesn't mean you're guaranteed to win the run back. But hey, I'm going to believe that Kurama does it. Then he would go into Tweak. Now, this isn't as great of a draw as the other two because Tweak has beaten him the last time they played. I think it was at Port Priority Grand Finals where Tweak was able to win both sets. And Kurama made it competitive on that last set, so it's not necessarily going to be a blowout, but I would still favor Tweak there. But in the losers bracket, even if he doesn't beat T, let's say he goes into this path, he should be able to beat Ned. He should be able to beat Cosmos, because also for Cosmos, he's trying out a combination of Joker Aegis because he wants to main Joker, so it's probably going to be Joker for like a first game or two and then Aegis, so you definitely have a bit of an advantage there unless the Joker has become crazy in a week, but Joker's not really a character that kind of gets good super fast. It's more of a long haul, so maybe it's not even Cosmos because he could get upset, but again, we'll see. I have faith in the Joker for later on at least, but assuming Kurama does make that upset or does that win in general, he would go against Shuton, and he has a very good record versus Shuton. He is 3-1 versus Shuton lifetime. You would definitely favor Kurama here, and with that, he should be able to make top 8. If he does beat T, though, he would go into potentially Apollo Kage, which isn't as great of a draw. They've only played once, and Apollo Kage did win it 3-1, but I think Kurama's playstyle is really good versus Snake. The way he just kind of moves right outside of your burst range, his prowess with his movement, the way he uses F-tilt and everything like that, I think he'd be pretty good at avoiding grenades if he was conscious of it. I'm sure he knows the matchup down packed by now because you kind of have to. Snake is such an abundant character, so I think Kurama will have enough adaptation to be able to beat Apollo Kage. On paper, he should beat Shuton, and I think there's multiple ways he can make top 8, because he could also just beat Tweak to make top 8 as well. Like, that's definitely a possibility. The next player I want to talk about is going to be Meister, because he has been making waves as of late, and his bracket path is actually fairly decent for him. He is supposed to go against Ned, which isn't an amazing match for Game Watch necessarily, but I definitely think that is one he can overcome. Then he would go into Onin, and they have a bit of a rocky history, but the last encounter, you did have Meister taking that in a reverse 3-0, I believe, so kind of dramatic fashion. I'm sure Onin has definitely been grinding to learn the matchup, but most recently, he lost to Mia. Again, very competitive set, so even though Meister might be favored in the last encounter, Onin has clearly been getting better at the matchup and putting in the work, so maybe not as free as I'm thinking, but I definitely have faith in Meister to make that upset. Then he would go into Spargo, which is probably the worst opponent maybe in the world that he could have gotten. Maybe Leo is a little bit worse, but Spargo is a very tough draw, so let's assume he does lose to Spargo. He would go into Zomba, which is an amazing draw for him because Game & Watch Rob isn't really winnable. That is a super tough matchup. Now, Zomba has beaten Meister with his Lucina, but he hasn't really been having as much success with Lucina as of late versus Game Watch. I'm sure people are much more ready for it, including Meister, so it's going to be tough for Zomba to pull that one out. Not impossible, and I would favor Meister to get top 8 through that way. And let's say he does go into the losers bracket. He would go into Sonics, which I think is definitely doable. It's not going to be free. It is still Sonics. I think Game Watch actually does decent versus Sonic. Maybe an even match for the character. Again, doing decent versus Sonic means you don't get like absolutely destroyed. You can actually put up a fight when they start camping you, and you do, of course, have that disengage button, which is really helpful for Game Watch because Sonic's pressure is super scary. So I think he can beat Meister. I think he can definitely beat Zomba. Again, that matchup is terrible, and I think he can beat Onin. So he has a couple ways to do it through top 8, but I think his most likely way if he wants to get top 8 is he has to beat Onin, potentially lose to Spargo, probably lose Spargo. Again, matchup is really hard, and then beat Zomba. Also, just for those who are curious, the record for Meister Sonics is going to be 3-2 in Sonics' favor, but he won the last 3 encounters he's played, and essentially since Sonics has become a super top player, he's been beating Meister every single time, so that's less favorable for Meister than I thought on paper, but still, the Zomba path for him is really good, because again, Rob Game & Watch is really bad. Now, we are going to be moving on to the top 8 just because that's where most of the drama is, but there are a couple matchups I want to talk about that I think could be upsets. The first one is going to be Apollo Kage and Base Mage. I think Base Mage can definitely upset that. One, Base Mage has been doing really good as of late. Like, he has been farming at tournaments looking extremely impressive. And two, Hungrybox was able to take Apollo Kage to Game 5 at a tournament where he beat MK Leo and Gluttony. So that doesn't super instill confidence in me in that matchup for Apollo Kage. Now, I imagine he's probably grinded that matchup since then, has gotten a lot better at it, and also Hungrybox is an amazing player. Like, he's even beaten Base Mage. So this isn't necessarily a free win, but the way that Base Mage has been playing as of late, I definitely think that he can take this one. I also think Chase over Jackal is definitely a possible upset. Not because I even think that Jackal has a necessary weakness versus Palutena. I actually think he does pretty good versus the character. I'm just predicting Chase is going to pop off because in the next like 5 or so tournaments, Chase is probably just going to top 8 a major randomly. Like, he's going to pop off super hard, be playing out of his mind. So I'm just going to keep predicting him for the next video so I can say I was right about it the whole time. And then the final player that I want to mention is going to be Capitan Cito, just because he has been impressing me a lot as of late. Like, these last runs from him have been looking incredibly impressive, especially that low tide city run. That's going to be the main run, of course, but I think there's definitely a couple upsets he can make just from matchup unfamiliarity, plus the fact that he is like ridiculously good at this game. But there's a bunch of people here that could also make upsets. Like, Monty's one, though he also have to go against Songs, which is a really tough draw. Kind of the same thing for Tweak versus Ludo as well, just really tough draw, but doable upsets because these players have been incredibly impressive as of late. So if there's a player that I left out, and again, I probably did because there's a lot of people to talk about at this tournament, just let me know down below and I'll be sure to go over their run. But now, on to the top 8. So let's talk about how this event could affect the rankings, because these are the 8 players where the rankings actually matter the most, because 1 or 2 spots is a pretty big deal when you go from, like, let's say the 5th best player in the world to the 3rd best player in the world. I think Light could potentially break into the top 4 if he wins this tournament. That could be huge for him. I think Spargo doesn't need to win the tournament. He just needs to do okay at the tournament. He needs to get top 8, and then he's pretty much guaranteed his #1 spot in the world for the rest of the season. If Spargo wins this tournament, then it's out of the question that Aqua's going to be the best, because there is still a world where Aqua gets #1 ranking in the season just because he has so many major wins under his belt. And the last 3 months, while it's clearly Spargo is the best, the last 3 months isn't the entire season. You got like 3 months before that as well. So I think if Spargo performs here, that #1 spot pretty much going to be guaranteed. For Tweak as well, if he wins here, that #3 spot's going to be guaranteed for him, because I think the only 2 people in the world that could potentially take that from him are Leo and Light, but they would of course have to win the event. And that's the thing for Leo and Light. I think if both those guys win the event, they could maybe be 4. I think if Leo wins it, I put him at 3, but if Light wins it, I'd probably put him at 4. I would still give the edge to Tweak, but of course, maybe he goes head-to-head, he beats Tweak twice. That's definitely a possibility. If Shuton wins it, he can get pushed up higher into the top 10. Same thing as Sonics. Now for Odin, this is going to be a really important tournament for Odin's season, because Odin's season right now, it isn't amazing. A bunch of regional wins and wins at those regionals, which are really important, of course, but the only major performances that he has underperformed at. So if Odin wants to get a good ranking this season that actually reflects the talent of his player, because he's still extremely talented, he's going to need to do pretty well at this tournament. It's kind of the same thing for T. If T underperforms this tournament, he probably falls out of the top 10 because he's barely just drifting on that top 10 line. It's between him and Gluto for that final spot. So there's a lot of connotations on this. Not as important as Battle of BC, of course, because that was her determining the best player in the world, but this is going to shake up the top 10 a lot depending on how people do. And let's actually talk about these matchups, because in the winner's semifinals, our first matchup is going to be Spargo versus Light. And this is a bit of a weird one, because Light is one of the few players that Spargo hasn't just been running over as of late. The last time they played, Light was able to take it. It was at Genesis. It was a little bit ago, granted, but on paper, you would want to favor Light here, but then you look at Spargo's result, and it's like, okay, maybe I want to favor this guy. But regardless, this is going to be an absolute banger of a match that it happens, because we haven't seen it in a little bit. Spargo has leveled up massively, and Light's coming off a win at MomoCon, so that's going to be a good set. Then you have Leo versus Tweak. Now, in the past, this goes to Tweak a lot. A majority of the times, it goes to Tweak. I'm really curious to see who Leo plays, because I genuinely have no idea, but you're on paper going to want to favor Tweak here. He has about the same results as Leo. He's been beating him in the head-to-head consistently, and the matchup also on paper is really good for him. Diddy Kong does very well versus all of Leo's characters, so maybe we see a new character from Leo come out. Maybe something that he found old sticks with it, and he finally gets a win over Tweak, because it's been a little bit since Leo's been able to take that one. So I'm curious to see how that goes. And also, it'd be their first time playing under LG, which is going to be hype. And in losers round 1, we're going to stick to the trend of me just going with the seeding because I think this is probably going to be how it turns out. You have Shuton versus Ono, which is a matchup that we have yet to have an ultimate, but Shuton has a lot of experience versus Aquila. Now, this could actually mess him up. We've seen this happen in the past to people. They'll play a bunch against one specific main, and then they'll lose to a different person of that same main because the playstyle is incredibly different. And C's probably the character that you fall to that the hardest on because there's so many different ways to play him. So that might come to bite Shuton in the butt, but I still imagine that he does take that dub. I think Aegis does fairly well in the matchup also. And then you would have T versus Sonics. Now, I'm going to pick Sonics here. They are 1-1 lifetime. It was at Double Down where T was able to take the first set. And then I think it was LSI where Sonics was able to beat T. I'm not super sure about that, but Sonics, his improvement rate has been rapid, and T is a little bit more shaky this season, so I am going to favor Sonics there. Then you would have Leo versus Shuton and Sonics versus Light, because I don't know if I said this, but I do predict Spargo should probably beat Light, and these should be one-sided matchups. Light should beat Sonics because he usually does, though Sonics was able to get a win at MomoCon, and Shuton should beat Leo. Now, Shuton has never lost a game to Leo. It is 9-0 in his favor. 2 of them were at a pre-local, but at the Scuff World Tour, Shuton was able to 3-0 him there. I imagine Leo does not want that to happen again, and this is a matchup I really hope that we see because it really could go either way. Even though Shuton has such a strong record, it's still MK Leo. It's really hard to count him out, even in his little slump. So I'm still going to say that Shuton does win that because you got to give him the respect. On paper, he always wins it, but Leo could definitely surprise people and take that set. So let's talk about our top 4 in winners finals. You got Spargo, Tweak. Losers finals, you have Light versus Shuton. And Light Shuton is actually really interesting to me because the record is 4-1 in Shuton's favor. I know that doesn't sound super interesting, but the last time they played was Frostbite 2020, and Light was able to win it. So there's a couple possibilities here. Almar Fox, I don't think is one of them because I just think Light was going to win that. I think Almar doesn't do amazing versus Fox. And then you have Fox Aegis, which is probably going to happen. On paper, Aegis' favor there. On one hand, you have Light with a lot of experience versus Cosmos, but on the other hand, you have Shuton with a lot of experience versus Viserion. Now, I talked about this earlier in the Shuton Onin set. There is a potential that these people just know the characters super in and out, but they're only used to one playstyle of the character. Maybe Light plays different from Viserion, way more aggressive, so he's not ready for it, and maybe Shuton plays way more passive than Cosmos, and Light isn't ready for the timings. Even though you know the character in and out, it's so much different when you're playing a different player at the top level, so these guys both might get messed up from that. We might have a super spaghetti set, but I am going to predict that Shuton wins it just because Aegis does well versus Fox, and you also have the factor of, yes, Shuton is normally beating Light, even though they played such a long time ago, and both players have leveled up massively. I'm still going to favor Shuton for that one, and now we have winners finals, and this one's a little bit weird because Spargo and Tweak go back and forth. I also have to say, this is a really bad bracket for Spargo. He got 2 of the hardest opponents in the world, if not the 2 hardest opponents in the world he could have gotten in Light and Tweak, because those are 2 players that are trading sets with him back and forth, even on his rise to the top. So not amazing. I'm sure there's a couple other people you could pick that may be a little worse, but it's going to be a stressful tournament for Spargo, and it's going to be especially stressful after Tweak sends him to the losers bracket. What is my reasoning for this? I just need America to have a win right now. We are getting destroyed on the rankings. Mexico, Japan are winning literally everything, and if it's not them, it's Riddles from Canada. So we need a dub. I'm going to say that Tweak wins this one. Losers finals, I predict that Spargo and Tweak would both beat Shuton. I just think they do well in that matchup versus him, which is a little unfortunate for him, but still, I think Spargo Tweak's going to be grand finals, and even if Spargo resets the bracket, it's really hard to predict that. I'm going to predict that Tweak wins it because we need that America dub. And I thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know we didn't go over as many players in this video, but I did want to talk more about the top 8 because I think the top 8 is where it gets the most interesting. But again, if there's a player that I left out, please let me know down below. I'll be sure to go over how their run is. And yeah, thank you guys for everything. Sport has been absolutely unreal, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.